Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Our budget meeting, July 27th, 1 o'clock. First order is approval of the agenda. Any additions, or if you're satisfied, I'd entertain a motion to approve it. Moved by French, second by Jaguar. Please call the vote.
French.
Yes.
Councillor Jaguar.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchaba.
Yes.
Warden Marks.
Yes,
4-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. Everyone has read them. Are there any errors, omissions, corrections? Okay, seeing none, mover and seconder, please. Jaguar and Ketchaba. Please call the vote.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jaguar.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchaba.
Yes.
Warden Marks.
Yes,
0, the motion is carried.
thank you. I'll remind everyone disclosure of pecuniary interest. And I'm not seeing any, so dispense with that. Move on to delegations, and I do not believe we have any. Am I correct? Okay. Briefings and reports. I'm looking towards Jim. Are you up?
I'm up. The first report is the second quarter performance. You will see that we have favorable good news of $225,000. That brings the year to date to just over $400,000. The performance for the second quarter was driven by wage performance, where we had numerous positions that had been vacant. And you can see there in the report the list of departments that were affected by that.
Sorry to interrupt, Jim. Should we be sharing the report on the screen?
Sure. Yeah. Please. Now, the other item that I'd like to discuss from this report is POA. You'll see there that it's negative $4,000, so a very minuscule amount. However, it's important to note because of the numbers behind that. There's been cost reductions of $170,000 related to COVID, but also then losses of revenue of $400,000. As a result, no payments were made to the local municipal partners. We expect that as court sessions are resuming via video through the fall, that our numbers should improve. And our hope is that we'll be able to bounce back somewhat, but the local treasurers are all aware that on the full year, it's quite possible they may not see any payments. 2022, hopefully things will be going back to normal, and we'll have even a catch up from what we've lost in 20 and 21. So, and with that, the recommendation is the report be received and filed.
Question from Ed.
Thank you. Jim, regarding the POA, a lot of the, I understand the revenue stream is used to write down the payment on the building. Will that be normalized in 2022? Are we behind, I guess, because we've had no revenue from POA?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
Okay, are not POA revenues being used to write off the cost of the building?
The building is one of the expenses
Right.
incurred in that department, yes.
Okay, so that's what the question, with no revenues, is it going to impact into 2022 to make up the shortfall that you didn't experience in 2021 or 2020?
We don't look at it specifically for the building.
Okay,
Building is just one of the expense lines. We may then have to carry forward, depending on where we end up, we may have to carry forward the loss into the following year and put that into our numbers as we determine the municipal partner payments in 2022, if there's any carry forward costs that weren't covered.
okay. I guess what I was fishing for was, would this interrupt any potential municipal sharing down the road? Because you're trying to recover that loss
The loss of the
from the POAs. Yeah.
it directly affects what the municipalities will be receiving. And then, like I said, ultimately, hopefully there's a bounce back, but what we don't recover, that then flows through directly to the municipalities because they ultimately receive the net revenue, the net income. And if it's reduced because of COVID related losses, then yes, that does flow through to the municipal partners.
Jim, when you mentioned the number that we're on the good side, and it was mainly because of we hadn't replaced vacant staff, how much of that total was that? Because if that's the case, how much have you sort of, like you called it efficiency, and that the fact that someone's vacant, that's more happenstance. Just the number that you've sort of tightened the belt and found efficiency, how much is that?
Efficiency, what related to COVID, you mean?
Excuse me.
The number, most of the number that you mentioned,
The 227 in performance, wage performance?
and how much of that was the fact that people weren't at work? Positions weren't filled.
Well, the 227 is all because of positions not being filled. The total performance was 225 overall. And that was basically all explained by the wage. And then there's other minor movements up and down. But it's basically the wages pretty much explain the entire amount. And then, as I said, POA was a kind of a subset and a unique story just because of what's happening internally within the department, which isn't so much of an impact on the county, but does have the impact on the local municipal partners, which is why I wanted to highlight it for this report.
Thank you.
So then the recommendation is that the report be received and filed.
All right, we've heard the report. Are there more questions for Jim or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we receive and file. Moved by French. Second by Jaguar. Call the vote, please.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jaguar.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Warden Marks.
Yes,
4-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Changes to prior 10-year plan. Jim, is that still you?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mr. Ward. On February 9th, council approved the budget and with that, the 10-year plan from 2021 through 2030. That had a net income of 84.8 million and capital spend of $209 million over that 10-year period. The budget before you today, as adjusted and pending your approval, stands at 83.5 million for net income, 210.5 million for capital. This is a change since the February numbers of $2,680,000. Next, I'll take you through the highlights of what those changes are. Council has approved some changes relative to staffing. We have incremental costs associated with the appointment of the deputy CAO. And then, as Julie was mentioning, the new counselor that started today, the sum of those wages over the 10-year period adds up to just under $2.3 million, which compared to the levy is a 0.6%. As well, we've added money for the intranet, and that adds $171,000 to the 10-year plan. Additionally, on the IT side, we also added $44,000 for a connectivity consultant and $23,000 for dietary software. On the capital budget, we added $97,000 for pickup trucks for engineering. As well on capital, there were some corrections for the Terrace Lodge redevelopment. On January 26th, just before council approval, the council approved an adjustment or a change to the Terrace Lodge budget that didn't get incorporated at the time into the budget. So we're catching up on that now. As well, Terrace Lodge has been a project that's been in the works since about 2012, started with a minor renovation. a change to a new construction, and then finally to the redevelopment that we're seeing today. The costs that we incurred for design work for the minor renovation and the new build ultimately have to be capitalized with the new construction. So we need to roll that in as well. So that has all been incorporated into this current budget. The balance of the changes that we see are actually reductions, so improvements in cost as a result of the inflation on wages being less than we had budgeted, and that's providing us $470,000. In terms of the financial implications, just as a reminder, when council approved the 10-year plan, that was with average home increases of 3.6% from the time window of 2023 through 2029, thereafter reducing to inflationary increases. With this $2.7 million change that is before us, if there were no further changes that were incorporated into this budget cycle, that would represent a 0.6% increase over and above the 3.6 that was previously approved. We'll be going through in the subsequent report our budget timing, and we'll be taking through what staff is doing, but just really quickly, we are then going through the various budget line items, looking for at both risks and opportunities, and the sum of that will be brought back to you later this year for your approval. So this is just preliminary at this time. So the recommendation before you is that the report be received and filed, and that the changes to the 10-year plan of $2,680,000 be approved for inclusion in the 2022 budget cycle review.
Thank you, Jim. Open the floor for questions or comments, please. Go ahead, Dominique.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jim, can you help me clarify? So the 2.2 in total is over 10 years.
Yes.
Then some of the other numbers are they, which ones are one time and which ones are, I'm just looking at 171,000, for example. It says over 10 years. So is it
Yes.
171 per year?
No, that's 171 over the 10-year window.
Okay, so I can divide that one by
Yeah.
10. Okay, the 44,
That is a one-time cost, so it's also the impact on the 10-year window as well, but it's only happening once.
one time, the 23,
That is over the 10 years, so it's a couple grand a year.
okay. And the 97,
That is a one-time cost that's happening a couple of times for a total of $97,000.
and did I have one more? So the wages of 470.
That is the impact from 2021. However, that improvement flows through into all the future years then as well, right? So it's again over.
That one is over, so you could kind of
Yeah.
divide it by 10.
Correct. Yeah, so they're all could be divided by 10 if you wanted to get an average annual cost.
So really, so except for the 44 then,
Yes.
connectivity, all the other ones,
Well, and the pickup trucks.
the pickup trucks, okay. Okay,
Further comments? All right. So we're at the point of receiving a motion, receive and file and adopt a recommendation. Mover and seconder.
Sure.
Ketchabah and Jaguar. Carolyn, please call the vote.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jager,
yes,
Counselor Ketchabah,
Yes.
Gordon Marks,
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
And again, thank you. Moving on to 2022 budget cycle training. Jim, you're still up.
Carolyn, can you pull up the timing on the screen, please? In the past, we've begun budget deliberations in the fourth quarter. And by February, then council approves the budget. And then we also, in the second quarter, will do a revised bylaw because of the implications of the landfill where we need to keep it revenue neutral. We'll bring in a revised bylaw that recalculates the ratio in order to achieve that revenue neutrality on the rate. What we'll do now is we'll go through the proposed timing for this budget cycle. And then we're looking for the committee's feedback on any changes they would like to see and how we proceed timing wise with this budget cycle. We've already begun in June with a management meeting where we kicked off the budget process, and we reviewed. We began the process of looking at what risks and opportunities there are for this window of 2022 through 2031. We had a subsequent meeting in July last week, and went through that again, and it'll be a process that'll be continuing on for the coming couple of months. For today's budget meeting with this committee, this what we would consider meeting number 1 of the 2022 budget cycle for the committee. We'll be looking at the small business class, if there's interest in rolling that out in 2022. We already reviewed the changes that have happened to the budget since February, and we'll be at the end of this meeting soliciting your direction on how to proceed. Any advice you have in terms of what management should consider as we continue to work on the budget. In August, finance will be working with the various departments to begin incorporating risks and opportunities into the budget model. And we'll be bringing that back then for another management review in September. Also in August, we'll be looking to send out a survey, a public survey, which was mailed out or emailed out to committee members yesterday. So if there's anything on that survey, we'll also be happy to take your feedback on that as well. As I mentioned in September, the leadership team will review the changes, the proposed changes that were incorporated into the budget models, looking to see if everything's been captured correctly, what further changes we'd like to see, looking at what the tax implications are for those various changes, which we will then bring back to the committee in October for review. And those budget changes will have incorporated what we're seeing coming back from these public surveys. And at that time, we'll be then seeking the committee's direction on what further changes we should make to that proposed budget as we move forward. We would then in early November take a preliminary look to county council, which would obviously be informed from the steering committee meeting that we had in October. And then from the direction from that steering meeting and from the council meeting, we would then make changes at the staff level in the middle of November so that we could bring back revised budgets to this committee at the end of November. And then in early December, we would bring a budget for approval to county council. With that, we will be asking for approval of the budget numbers, but we won't be bringing in the bylaw. We're going to skip that step of bringing in a bylaw and then later. With that, then we would then come back to this committee in March. With that, we would then have the revised impact assessments, and we will have been able to also have calculated the landfill revenue neutrality ratio. Also, if there happen to be any changes that were external, I'm thinking in particular, the province always seems to be coming late to the table with information. So could well be that what we approved in December, there may be some substantial change coming or a minor change even for that matter coming from the province, which we would then bring to the budget committee meeting at the beginning of March. And that would allow us then by the end of March to bring that to county council. And with that, we would then ask council to pass the ratios, the rates, and the levy through the appropriate bylaws. The There is no direct financial implication from this change in process, but indirect, I think there's a lot of advantages to doing it this way. The early start of the process by management allows management to do enhanced deliberation, meaning that we're going to bring a better budget product to the committee for review. As well, approval of budgets in December means then that department managers have certainty of what their budgets are heading into January. They can begin their planning, hopefully take advantage of better pricing from suppliers, because often ordering earlier in the year is advantageous on the pricing front. So at this time, it would be helpful to receive any direction or feedback that the committee has that staff and management can then use as we work to develop budgets for you to review in October, excuse me.
All right, thank you, Jim. I'll look to Mary, Ed, and Dominique. Do you have any suggestions, comments? We satisfied with the way it's going? Dominique?
Yeah, the timing looks great. I agree. I think we'll give everybody more time to review, as you said, more debate and deliberations. Did you say you wanted to discuss the survey as well as part of
Yes.
item? I had a couple of notes about the survey, which I think, so I pulled the one from last year. So I think it's an exact copy of the one from last year, and which we pulled, I shouldn't say we, I think staff pulled off super efficiently last year. So I was wondering, without changing the nature of the survey, because the comparison would be good, is there an opportunity to maybe tweak sometimes just the turn of phrase of certain of some of the STEM statements that are maybe a little awkward? And I can email that separately, just like little grammatical things that might just make each statement a little bit clearer. The other thing I looked at was, I know last year when we received the feedback, we found that a lot of the comments were about services that are not county services. And we said, that's okay, that's all part of education. So taking that into account, I was wondering, would it be useful to, in the beginning, you talk about services that we do offer. Should we maybe name a couple of services we don't?
Sure.
I don't know what others think, like to help with that education, that clarity, like we don't do water, so fees so maybe that will give us more focused comments. And I think I only have one or maybe one new question. I was wondering, trying to pull up, there's one question where we said, would it be where could we spend more tax dollars? So pick your top 2 areas. And I'm wondering if we could add a question where we said, what would be an acceptable way of spending more? Is it by increasing the levy? Is it by cutting somewhere else? Is it by finding efficiencies? Like what? So it's one thing for the public to say, yeah, we want you to spend more on ambulance. But maybe as part of that, say, yeah, but not if that means increasing my levy.
Mhm.
So, and I think I'm stealing that from the Elmer survey. That I think there is a similar question that says like, what would be the acceptable way of increasing spending in some areas? And then the other one, looking at the feedback from last year, when we ask about, do you feel you're getting good value for money? Then people have an opinion of yes or no. But I was looking at the comments and I'm thinking, are we getting good information out of that? And could we put a text box to say, explain? I mean, it's optional. It's always optional. But if they're answering, no, I don't feel I'm getting good value, it would be nice to say, oh, like what's behind that opinion? So we might get a little bit more.
Okay, great.
So those were some suggestions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Further comments? Happy, Ed?
Yeah, I don't see anything problematic with it. Again, just from recollection, there was a lot of confusion over who does what. And I don't have, I think it might provide a little clarity that, the county doesn't do that. So don't waste your time telling us that you want better. Go somewhere else. But I guess it's like everything else. Be careful what you ask for. You never know what you're going to get from a comment point of view, whether it's going to be helpful or not, but at least perhaps you'll know the ratepayer's mind. So I don't think we want you to reinvent the wheel because I think you've got a good foundation to start with. Just maybe tweak a little. Sure.
Certainly from my part, us being in the same building with the county and Central Ogden, people are terribly confused at the different rules. If they call here and want better fire protection, they should be calling there. And so anytime you give information out, it does kind of help in the battle so people know who to call and things. So there's lots and lots of confusion out there still. Mary's nodding her head yes. Mary, what do you think?
I have to agree with what's been mentioned. Just clarity. I know it's true. Last year, people were very confused. So if we can, make it a little clearer for people, I think they'd understand. A lot of people don't know the difference between what Elgin offers and what their own municipality offers. So I'm right on board with Councillor Jaguar and Councillor Ketchabaugh.
Thanks, Mary. Is this just an FYI? You don't need a resolution, do you, Jim, or do you?
The resolution is receive and file.
All right, we need a resolution, so I need a mover and seconder. Receive and file. Moved by French, second by
My turn?
Jaguar. Carolyn, please call the vote.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jaguar.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabaugh.
Yes.
Yes,
4-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Last one is small business subclass. Still up, Jim?
Sam, thank you, Mr. Ward.
Ed.
This subclass was introduced last fall without regulations. Those have now been issued by the province. And so the purpose of today's report is to bring the committee up to speed with what all those regulations are and to provide feedback from discussions that we've had with the local treasurers. To start with, I'd like to talk about the small farm value added subclass. That was introduced 2-3 years ago. Similarly, it was introduced without any regulations, and then partway through the year, they finally did introduce it. With that one, though, they had a very defined set of rules, and those rules were that if the municipality instituted, in this case, the county instituted the class, then any property, farm property that had a commercial or industrial roll number that was valued below $1 million would receive a 75% reduction on their first $50,000 of assessment. And with that, it was MPAC's job to identify those roll numbers and to move those roll numbers into the class. So the work was all being done by MPAC. Our work was to calculate what the tax impact would be of that, to get the council to consider approval of it, and then ultimately that was it. It was pass a bylaw. County council would pass a bylaw. This, in contrast, the small business subclass is far more complex. I think the province is trying to give municipalities great flexibility, but they may also have created a monster in the process as well. At least that's the view from the various local municipal treasurers. One of the complications is that you can also have, with this, you can have multiple subclasses. So it's not just one single small business subclass. We could have a different subclass in each one of our 7 local municipal partners municipalities that would be different from their neighbors. Not only that, but even within one municipality, you may have multiple classes. You could have in one business area, it could be one class, and another business area, it could be another. I guess so you can tailor where you have economic growth happening, again, focused on great flexibility, but also then with a lot of complications. In this case, if we were to pass a bylaw to approve this subclass, you could approve a discount of up to 35%. It cannot be greater than 35%. And it could be on either the commercial class or the industrial class or both. The other thing to note is that the creation of the class is something that has to happen at the county level. There can be uniquenesses in each of the municipalities, but ultimately the passing of the class has to happen here at Elgin County. So that is the one feature that is consistent with the small value added farm class. Now I'll go through some more of the differences with this compared to the small value added farm. With the small value added farm, education was automatic, will be passed our bylaw. In this case, it will be something that the province will consider. There's no guarantee that they will pass it through on education. And then we have numerous obligations in order for them to even consider it. So we'll have to pass a bylaw, we'll have to show that we've conducted consultations with business stakeholders. And then once that's done, then the province will consider on a case-by-case basis if they're interested in approving this for the education component. Next, they've given again great flexibility in how this will be ruled out. It could be done as a purely administrative process if it's approved, but it could also be done as, which means then that it's staff would be managing an administrative process, but it could also be done by application, meaning that property owners would need to apply and have their applications considered for approval. If we did it by an administrative process, the inclusion of the subclass then would be the responsibility of the various finance departments in each of the local municipalities to determine which properties fall into that subclass. Also putting them at risk that there's one that they somehow miss and didn't include when they should have. On the other side, if the application process is chosen, then that workload gets put onto the property owners. However, there's actually far more workload that's going to be added on staff in order to manage that administrative or that application process. So you'd have to design the application form, you'd have to create a distribution method, you'd have to be helping in filling out the applications, answering questions. So that would all be added incremental work required in the application process. Regardless of which process, whether it's administrative or an application process, there's a lot of incremental work that would be put on the local finance departments that we did not see when the small value added farm was introduced. So one, we'd have to annually do a review process of the subclass, reviewing requirements, application, level of discounts. That would be a process that would have to happen annually. Also, the province is requiring that we appoint a program administrator, and that program administrator would then be responsible for working with Impact to get the properties moved into the subclass. They'd be working with the Ministry of Finance to provide them the information the province needs to determine if they're going to provide an education reduction. And they'd have to be then also posting a public registry of the properties that have been put into the subclass. We would also have to appoint an arbitrator, because with this, there could be disputes, and those disputes would then come to the arbitrator for reconsideration. If the arbitrator rules against the property owner, that property owner still has the right to appeal to the ARB. Again, a much more onerous, complex process than what we're seeing in a small business farm class. From From the finance perspective, where we're also concerned is how much of a tax reduction are we going to see as a result of this if we were to roll it out? And that is going to be difficult to determine, in particular if it's an application based, because it depends how many applications you're going to receive, which means then that we have in our planning process, great on. The other financial implication will be if we do it of application based is going to be the incremental cost of that overhead because of all the extra workload involved. So we're looking at then two costs. One would be lost tax revenue, which is hard to determine, and the other would then be an overhead increase in cost. Last thing I'd like to point out is that in order to engage this or to enact this subclass, we need to do community engagement. And it's not only required for implementation, but it's also required annually. So again, further incremental workload. So as I have mentioned, we've reviewed this with the local treasurers at our treasurers meeting, and it was unanimous that they are recommending against implementation of this subclass. The factors that they took into account when making that recommendation is that the added staff time that's going to be required, that we may actually have to add staffing. There may be hiring required in order to be able to keep up with this. There's the negative impact in terms of reactions from business owners if they're not happy with the results, feeling they should have received a rebate when they did not. And then there's what are we going to do in terms of absorbing these costs that are being incurred either through lost revenue or increased overhead costs? And those are going to be borne by the other taxpayers. So in particular, obviously, the biggest class, residential, they're going to have to absorb the cost of this program. And is that something that we want to put on those residential taxpayers? Lastly, if county council chose not to implement the subclass for 2022, it does not preclude council from choosing in future years to roll out this subclass. So it's not a decision that if we decide not to proceed, that it's done and we can never proceed again. We can always revisit it each year and revise the recommendation and pass this class in the future if it makes sense. What the local treasurers are suggesting is that one of the things that would make it palatable is if the province were to enact regulations that are more similar to what we're seeing in the small business farm class, where MPAC is taking on the bulk of the burden and eliminating a lot of the potential for conflicts with ratepayers as a result of people not being happy, not being in the class. So if it's far more rules-based and driven by MPAC, then the treasurers would be much more comfortable in coming forward and recommending in future years that we roll forward with this class. So for this report, because we're not recommending that this be implemented, there's only one recommendation to this report, and that is that it be received and filed. But of course, if there's a different direction from this committee, then we'll move that forward.
All right, thank you, Jim. Ed, go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, if I understand correctly, the province has not identified certain thresholds or criteria which qualifies the small business class?
No, the only threshold is the 35% reduction.
Up to 30.
Yes.
So if some choose to take the province up on this and some choose not to, it's going to be a real hodgepodge or heterogeneous mix across the province. Wow. And then the further onus would be on the county to establish what those threshold criteria would be. I can understand, the small value added farm subclass, small farm value added subclass. It's defined, MPAC defines what they are. It's limited to the first 50,000, and I think the overall exposure to the county has got to be somewhere around maybe under 10,000, is it not?
I think it was 12.
Close enough.
Yeah.
So, big deal, but it's defined. This thing, This thing sounds like a bear. This thing sounds like it's, as you say, an uncontrolled monster that could quickly become not only a political football, but also unmanageable from a staff perspective. So I tend to support the recommendation from the treasurers across the county.
I certainly agree. Like, think of just the discussion. You could use a lot of staff time just trying to sort it out. It's not cut and dried. You could talk about it forever and still never get anywhere. And Dominique?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I don't want us to be making staff-centered decision. Like, this is not about us. So it was created to relieve small businesses. And I guess I'm curious, outside of Elgin County, what's the trend, do you know, across the province? What I read was it seemed more appealing to large cities. In fact, larger cities were pushing the government to accelerate the regulation. And this is basically the idea of making the hospital world relieve. So the idea was not to transfer the burden on residential, but it would be transferred to large businesses. The relief was going to be provided to smaller businesses. So that's how I interpreted it. So I would want to make sure that we've thought also not only about us and the burden on us, but what would be the potential relief based on the intent of how this was designed? And does this apply in our region, or was this designed more for, as I said, for larger cities? So
I don't think the province looked at it as a large city versus rural environment. I mean, they made it completely flexible, so you could make it work anywhere if you were interested, and it's completely up to the local council to decide what makes sense. In terms of transferring the burden to the large businesses, that will not happen. At least, and I would say pretty much across the province, maybe with a rare exception. And that's because typically commercial and industrial ratios are beyond the range of fairness. We have the flexibility to lower those rates. We don't have the flexibility to increase it. So if we were to be providing reductions to some of the businesses in the commercial class, in order to make the others pay more, you'd have to increase the rate so that in total you're still generating the same amount of money from that class. But since we can't change the ratio, that would mean that the burden is being transferred effectively across all of the classes. So you're going to see residential then picking up the lion's share of that cost.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, yeah, so that's why I'm trying to understand, because at least in the media, this was not just pushed by the province. There were a number of mayors who were advocating for this. So certainly they would have thought of the burden on them before doing advocacy. And perhaps that's where the argument of the larger cities, perhaps on the administration, if you already have a larger overhead and a bigger finance department, perhaps that's why for them, they're seeing more the advantage of keeping businesses alive and by cutting them a break. And they're not seeing the burden of the administration. So that's why I'm saying I want to make sure we've also thought on both sides, because in the report, I'm not seeing anything about missed opportunity or how minimal this impact would be on our businesses. So it's not really a tool that is worth investing in and taking on this additional burden. Is there any way to estimate how worthwhile this tool would be? Or we rule it out because, nope, too much work, which I totally agree with.
Ed, can I jump in? Okay. In my mind, without an established threshold, like a centralized thresholds, then how do you compare one center with the other? And I think Jim made the case, and I think he's right. If it's up to our staff to establish what that threshold is, and then our staff to establish who qualifies within the business community, and then our staff, on that case. Or if it's an application based, who's going to, some may apply, some may not. And I think it'd make it extremely difficult to try to quantify that. So I just find it astounding that, and understand the reasoning for it. But again, without an established qualification criteria, I almost view this other side as akin to one urban environment or one municipality offering almost a tax bonusing versus another to attract business or to maintain business. And I'm not sure that puts the onus back at the local level. That's pretty unfair.
Yeah.
Now,
And I'm
if
not-
province wanted to send you a paycheck to pay for staff to do this, that'd be fine.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not in favor of just trying to be devil's advocate because it was created by the province for a purpose and was advocated for by
Yeah.
some municipalities, so there has to be some good in it. So I want to make sure we thought of that or, put it in a balance.
And perhaps one thing to consider is that we have a very strong CIP program.
Yeah, that's,
And that ultimately how the businesses receive their relief, it's that they're getting relief. And perhaps one of the questions should be, are we providing the support they need through the CIP program? And are we getting, as a county and as a local municipalities, are we getting the results that we want to see? So with CIP, the result is that we're improving our business infrastructure. So it's not just providing a rebate and they stick that in their pocket. We're providing relief where they're investing. So it's getting, I think, the economic return that we want to see, perhaps more than this program would do.
I'm comfortable with that. Like that's the answer back to say, we already have a tool that seems to work well. So I wonder if some businesses could go to the province and say, hey, that's not fair. My municipality has decided not to implement this. And I mean, the province has created an interesting dilemma. We create the program, but the classic, you deal with it. But I think in our case, we could position our decision in the sense that we have a better, more efficient with the higher return on investment. We already have these tools. I would be comfortable with that.
Mary, I haven't been paying that close attention at the screen, so if you have a comment, go ahead. I apologize.
That's fine. I've been just listening. To be honest with you, the theory of it is great. I have no problem with the theory or why they're coming at it this way. But the problem is, to me, it's the provincial government making a feel-good story, saying that there's going to be help out there. But on the other hand, it's so onerous and there's no guarantees what type of relief anyone's going to get. And it could take months by the sound of it. And the cost to the municipalities and the time, I'm in favor. Sure, if we could do something to help our businesses, they're all in dire need. And I know that's why this has come forward. But on the other hand, if you're going to bring something forward, you should make it so it's easy and, accessible to everyone. This isn't. This is an onerous, process. So I don't know. I won't buy into the fact that the CIP is going to replace that, but it's certainly, it's still a bonus in our area that we do that. But I can see a lot of our businesses would love to have some kind of tax relief. But on the other hand, do they want to go through this onerous process? So I don't know. I'm not sold on it. I think it's one of those feel-good things, and I don't know if it's going to be beneficial to anyone, particularly if you have to jump through hoops. And who's got the time? Like, the businesses don't have the time for this either. They're, it's crazy. So I don't know. I'm not really in favor of it.
All right. Are we done? It kind of looks like we may be accepting staff recommendation on this. And I have no problem with that. Mover and seconder?
Sure, I'll take the one.
Okay, Ed and Mary? We know it.
Mary doesn't want to take the lump.
Okay.
I'll second.
Correction, Jaguar.
Counselor French. Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiboff,
Yes.
Warden Marks.
Yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
All right, thank you. I think that's all for you, Jim.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for that. We're at the point of other business. Do we have any? Not seen any. Correspond,
Excuse me.
any correspondence? No? Date of next meeting? Any suggestions?
We were looking at late October.
All right, you got a day?
I was also to bring in third quarter results, then we do it as late in the month as possible.
You want to pencil in a date for now, Jim, or?
Sure.
Looks like county council meets on the 12th and 26th. Do you want to tag it on?
26th.
I'm hearing we'll tag it on. And we'll call that 1 o'clock. Does that work? For you, Mary? That date works for you?
Yes.
All right. At that point, I haven't got anything else on my agenda other than adjournment. Does anyone else have anything before we close? All right, as always, thank you everyone for your time and preparation. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. French and Jiguer. Carolyn,
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiboff,
Yes.
Warden Marks.
yes.
4-0, the motion is carried.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Take care.
you.
You.